Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me on the Teachers Podcast today.
Pleasure.
So we're here now in your office. I'm feeling very tropical. If you're on the YouTube, then you'll be able to see. But if you're on the podcast, I've got lots of lovely plants behind me. It makes me look good in my dress, so thank you.
And can I just say, this plant was actually bought for me by my lovely doctoral students.
Oh, wow.
Last week, so we're showcasing
It is looking good.
a present from the students.
And I am quite into plants as well, and I have noticed, I was like, oh, this is an indoor plant, and what I'm pleased to see is that it's not drowning, because sometimes the soil is really wet, so well done you. So, we're in your office, we're at Leeds Beckett University. So, tell me everything, like, who are you, how did you get here today, where have you been?
So, I'm Jonathan Glazzard, I'm Professor of Inclusive Education in the Carnegie School of Education at Leeds Beckett University. My background is that I'm a teacher. I trained to become a teacher and then taught for 10 years in a primary school, in two primary schools actually. And I also took on the role of SENCo. I think that's where I developed my passion really for inclusion and special educational needs, inclusive education. So I taught in one school for 9 years, and then I got a promotion and became assistant head teacher in another school, and then I'd always wanted to have a leading role in training teachers, so that was kind of always there as an ambition. And I saw a job, and that's when I applied for it, and then moved out of school and into university teaching.
Wow, so that's how you decided to move. So why did you choose primary school?
Okay, so initially I wanted to be a secondary school teacher. So I wanted to be a history teacher. So I did A-level history. But back in the day, the exams were very, very hard. I'm not saying they're not hard now, but it was a particularly hard year, and only 4 people in my year group passed.
Wow.
History, and so I passed and got a grade C, but I needed to get a grade B to do history. So I didn't get into university. I didn't meet any of my offers to do history. So I thought I was in that position. After I got my A-level results, thinking, what do I do? And I thought, I'd gone into a primary school previously and had some experience, so I thought, well, actually, I quite enjoyed that, so I'll do a teacher training degree in primary education, and that's what I did. So it changed my path, actually.
Yeah, I just find that really interesting because I used to be a secondary teacher, then I went into primary afterwards, and I did it for the love of the subject. So you were going to do history because you wanted to be a teacher anyway, so you just found a different way around.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that. So obviously you've mentioned when you were in school you became SENCo. Was that just because there was an opening or they needed somebody to do it, or did you feel like this is something that I want to sort of take on now?
Yeah, I wanted to take it on because it was always something I was passionate about, working with children who had special educational needs, working with children who were, I guess, marginalised, and I felt that I could make a real difference there, and it was something that nobody else wanted to do in the school.
Yeah,
and
it's a really difficult job.
It's a very demanding job. There's an awful lot of work involved in it. There's an awful lot of paperwork and liaison with parents and liaison with different agencies. And it's something that I thought I could do, that I would enjoy, that I would make a difference in.
And how do you think that role then has helped you sort of in your teacher training journey?
I think it's been significant because that's where I initially developed my interest in special educational needs and my knowledge. I then decided to do a master's degree whilst I was still teaching in school, focusing on special educational needs, so that developed my knowledge further. And then I moved into teacher education, and I took responsibility for a lot of modules on special education and inclusion, and that really became the focus of my teaching. And I then decided to do a doctorate, again focusing on special education.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because I remember doing my PGCE, and if we had a session to help us, because obviously I did a PGCE, so you don't get as much. It must have been an hour or something, you know. So to know that you've you know, you've got somebody at the university who has this knowledge that you can tap into, and such a depth of knowledge, I think is amazing.
So I did a 4-year course in primary education, and I did nothing on special educational needs at all. So then, a year into my teaching career, I became a SENCo and had no underpinning knowledge. And that's when I started to think, actually, this is not good enough. You know, actually, trainee teachers, you know, need input, and that's really what kind of motivated me to really focus on special education within the university sector, because I felt, you know, I didn't get any input during my training, and I wanted them to have that input.
And what's great about that is you've seen that you didn't have it, and then you've made it happen, which, to be fair, at that level is quite a big thing, because there's not that many teacher training universities around, is there really? You know, not every university does teacher training. Well done, well done. Okay, so you've already said that you moved into teacher training because you saw an opening and you thought, yeah, I want to do that. So I'm just looking at, I've got so many questions for you because we had a conversation on the phone. So one of the things that I think that you can help us with, so I've mentioned that I didn't get a lot on inclusion or SEN or anything like that on my PGCE, and it wasn't in depth. I think, you know, teachers can go into the classroom feeling unprepared. If you had to tell a teacher 1 to 3 things that they should really know about inclusion, what would they be?
I think, first of all, it's important that teachers know that inclusion it's an ongoing process, and it's different for every child. So, you know, you can't just do a session, say, for example, on autism and think that actually all those strategies that you've been introduced to will work for that particular child. So it's knowing that it's an ongoing process, and that you constantly need to reflect on your practices to meet the needs of individual children. So I think that's one key thing, really. I think understanding that children with special educational needs don't necessarily need anything like wildly different to everybody else. They just need good inclusive teaching, and good inclusive teaching will benefit all children. So I think that's really, really key. I think having, you know, starting from where the child is in their development, so knowing where that child is in their development and building from that is really, really important. And having realistic expectations of what that child can achieve, I think is also really, really important. So I think what I'm saying really is
and both ways, I guess, as well, having realistic expectations that aren't too low as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So not assuming that because they've got special educational needs they can't achieve, because actually they can be extremely able. I think one of the dangers is that people associate special educational needs with low ability. And actually, a child could have a physical impairment, they could have a hearing impairment, a visual impairment, and be extremely bright. So having very high expectations of all children, I think is really, really important. But I think what I'm advocating really is a common sense approach to inclusion, and I think one thing that has always worried me is that teachers, and particularly trainee teachers, think that they're not capable of actually supporting children with special educational needs, because they feel that they need some kind of specialised teaching or specialised approaches, and that isn't the case. You know, actually, all teachers are teachers of children with special educational needs, and all teachers actually can teach them. And I think one of the problems of having external professionals coming in, and external professionals such as educational psychologists fulfil a really important role, but one of the problems with that is it disempowers the teacher. And they start to think, actually, I can't do that because I'm not a specialist. And I think that's very dangerous, because actually, as a teacher, we should be able to teach all children.
I think as well, just sort of writing a note from what you said there, part of it, I think, is, you know, we do get a specialist in, and then we expect from that 3-hour session that we get to be perfect. And then it's like, we don't want to do it if we're not perfect. But actually, like you said, it is a journey, and you're going to get better at it as you go on, and maybe, you know, you're not going to get everything right. But you're working towards getting it better. And I think, you know, you might have a child in your class 1 year with autism, and then you might have a child in another year with autism, and whatever you tried the first time round that you found worked, might not work.
Absolutely.
And you just have to be able to
Absolutely.
trusted to test things.
Yeah, and that's where the ability to be reflective and actually think, well, that didn't work for that child, but this might work for this child, and change what you're doing for different children.
Yeah.
So I was reading some research by an academic, she's retired now, called Barbara Cole, who used to teach me at Sheffield University, and she wrote a paper called In Good Faith and Effort, and basically what she argued in that paper is that parents of children with special educational needs don't expect you to know all the answers and come up with all the solutions, but they expect you to have, to work in good faith and to actually try things out and reflect on things, and actually create a sense of, belonging for that child and make that child feel included. And you might not know all the answers, but actually you're working within that good faith all the time, and I think that's quite important.
I think you're right on that with parents, but the interesting kind of counter thing here, do you think sort of head teachers and SLT are okay with that? Because I do feel sometimes it might be, well, why didn't it work? Sometimes as a teacher, I think you can feel that you can't try things out because they have to be right first time. Does that make sense?
I think, and I think that's not just the case for children with special educational needs.
Yeah.
I think actually now new teachers are going into teaching, and there is pressure on them to feel that they're getting things right, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And there's pressure on them to deliver outstanding teaching right from the beginning, and actually learning to be a teacher is an ongoing process. So when I went into teaching, we were allowed to kind of grow and develop in that role and make mistakes and reflect on those mistakes, and I think that's really, really important, and we need to go back to that. We shouldn't be expecting early career teachers to just hit the ground running. We should be giving them time to grow and develop and try things out, and actually experienced teachers should be doing that as well. We need to give all teachers that chance to try things out and reflect on what they're doing.
Yeah, because I think we by the time you get to the NGPGC or your teacher training, you know what you've got to do to get, I know they're not graded anymore, but you know what you've got to do to get to the highest point. But I remember a few years into teaching thinking, I don't know what I'm working towards anymore, and you kind of forget. And so the experienced teachers, you kind of all need to be in the same thing, because you come out of uni and you know everything, but it only takes a few years for you to feel like maybe you don't know anything anymore, which is not true, but you feel that way. I think your confidence
can actually decline, which is quite interesting. I've never really understood why that happens, but definitely you come out of teacher training thinking, you're going to change the world, and actually then 10 years down the line you're questioning it.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that happened to me. My confidence definitely declined, and it wasn't necessarily any factors other than myself, but teachers, can be self-sabotagers and that kind of thing. So I find that really interesting. So when we talked on the phone, we talked about mental health. So do you want to tell me what you've learned about mental health in the last few years?
Yeah, so mental health really became a big focus for me, I guess, 3 years ago, when I took on my current role as professor at Leeds Beckett University, and we created a centre of excellence for mental health in schools. And then I was asked if I would lead the research within that centre, so that's when it became a real focus for me. But it was also at the time when the government was prioritising mental health, so it was the time when the government was kind of releasing the Green Paper, which set out the government's 5-year strategy in 2017. So it's become really quite a recent focus for me, but it's become a real area of passion. Interestingly, mental health was never identified within the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice until 2015, when the Code of Practice was actually rewritten, and then mental health for the first time was identified as a category of special educational need. So it's interesting how things have changed over time. Yeah.
So what do you understand by mental health then? Because we all use the word, don't we? Well, the words. But what should we understand by it?
So I take my definition from the World Health Organization, who define basically mental health as a state of well-being, in which every individual is able to make a positive contribution to their day-to-day life and make a contribution to their community and to their lives and their jobs, basically. So it's somebody who's able to be productive and contribute in a meaningful way. I see mental health as a spectrum, which ranges from being mentally healthy to being mentally ill. So mental illness is kind of the extreme of that spectrum, but actually there's a whole other extreme called, which is all around being mentally healthy. And I think one of the problems is that we've had this stigmatisation of mental health for many, many years, and what we're now trying to do is destigmatise mental health. But I think the reason for that stigmatisation is that we've automatically assumed that mental health is the same as mental illness.
Yes.
And that's
just what I was thinking.
And I guess really what I'm trying to emphasise is that mental illness is only one facet of mental health.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm going as well, because I've been doing quite a few episodes recently about mental health and life-work balance and well-being, and I think I'm quite conscious about the words that I use, because I'm thinking, but if I say mental health, then we naturally kind of think of that as poor mental health, but we don't necessarily use the word before it, and then you think, can I use the word poor? And it can be like, we need to really think about how we are, the words we're using, so that we all understand the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So mental health includes mental wellness, being mentally well or being mentally healthy. It's not just about mental illness, and we really need to get that message across. I think that's really key. But I was reading some research about primary school teachers' attitudes towards mental health. This is really interesting. So the research suggests that primary school teachers are reluctant to use the term mental health with young children. They prefer to use the words like feelings and emotions, etc., rather than mental health. Now, this is interesting because this, I think, can lead to a stigmatisation of mental. It can perpetuate that stigma around mental health. So why are they reluctant to use that term mental health, but they're okay with using physical health? They're using physical health all the time with young people. They're talking about physical activity, etc., and physical exercise, but actually they're reluctant to use the term mental health. And I think it's because they're automatically associating mental health with mental illness.
Yes.
And actually what we need to do is we need to broaden people's understanding so that people are talking about mental wellness or being mentally healthy. And we need to achieve that parity, I think, we still need to go further to achieve the parity between physical health and mental health. So I think we should be using the term mental health with young children, because actually it's not something that we should be shying children away from and thinking that somehow it's going to be a danger to them, because actually they need to know about it.
And talking more about the fact that everybody has mental health. That's the thing that everybody has. And like you say, you're either mentally healthy or you're mentally ill, or you might be somewhere on the spectrum in between.
You might fluctuate.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, right. So what do you think about the government's policy on mental health then?
Okay, so I think, it was good that Theresa May in 2017 was kind of instrumental in producing the Green Paper, in getting that paper, produced, because that actually outlines the 5-year strategy. I have mixed feelings about it. So, so I think it's good that the government are kind of prioritising it and focusing on it. It's good that Theresa May said that mental health was children's mental health was one of the burning injustices of our time, and that we needed to address it. That was good. And it was good that they were flagging it up and saying this is a really key priority. However, in the Green Paper, the government said that they were only going to roll out their proposals to about a quarter of schools. Between a fifth and a quarter of schools. That isn't good enough, actually. No. Because if we're thinking about support that children need, so which schools are going to get the support and which schools won't get the support, which schools will get the funding, which schools won't get the funding, then it becomes a postcode lottery as to where you live. We know that mental health, children, regardless of social background, can experience poor mental health. So actually, why can't all schools get that support? So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, I feel that there's a clinicalisation of mental health, and it's not just me that feels like this. There are other academics who argue that there's a clinicalisation of mental health. And what I mean by that is there's a clinical model being implemented in schools. Okay, so the government are training a new brand of professional called the Education and Mental Health Practitioners. Now, the idea is that these practitioners will complete a training course and they'll go into schools and provide children with interventions, therapeutic interventions, counselling, CBT, etc., and different other therapies. so that children get the support in school rather than sitting on a long waiting list and being referred to CAMS. Children can get fast support in school. Now, although that sounds really, really good, there is an issue in clinicalising mental health and assuming that children always need clinical intervention, because actually the vast majority of children, I would argue, with poor mental health don't need clinical intervention. They don't need therapies, they don't need counselling, they don't need CBT. Now, some children do, some young people do need that, but they are the children at the most severe end. So I'm not saying that, counselling isn't important. It's very important for children who need it, but my concern is that we have this clinical model being implemented in schools, and actually what we know is that the majority of children with poor mental health will benefit from things like physical activity, social connectivity, so actually having friends and working within groups and teams. They will benefit from a sense of belonging in the school. They'll benefit from good self-esteem. They'll benefit from an assessment process that actually boosts their self-esteem rather than tells them their failures. They'll benefit from a curriculum that's rich and exciting and broad. So there's lots of kind of non-clinical interventions I think that children would benefit from, and we shouldn't be just assuming that children need that clinical intervention. I think it can be quite... It's
not a quick fix, is it?
No, I think it can be quite dangerous. So I think, what do I think about the government's policy? I feel that the government, by actually saying actually schools can do more around mental health, well, there's an issue there because teachers are already really, really stretched. Teachers' workloads are massive. Teachers' key responsibility is to educate children and young people, and it's to deliver the curriculum. Teachers are not mental health experts. They're not clinicians. They're not health professionals. They're educators. So that's one key thing there that I would say. I feel that the government's emphasis on kind of placing mental health into schools is actually absolving the government of addressing what I would call the real systemic factors that create poor mental health. So when we look at the causes of poor mental health, the causes are rooted in social circumstances often. I mean, the causes can sometimes be rooted within the child's biology, but often the causes are rooted within social circumstances such as poverty, adverse childhood experiences, etc., parental conflict, violence, abuse, neglect, etc. Why isn't the government addressing those factors? Because actually those factors, the problem is schools can only do so much. So actually they can do all this stuff around mental health, but children will still go back to those homes and those communities that's actually causing the poor mental health. So the government needs to really be focusing on those factors. And also I think the government needs to be looking at the current curriculum and the assessment systems within school and the extent to which they create poor mental health, such as exam stressors. Lots and lots of children now are very stressed with the curriculum and stressed with the examination system, and they're tested and tested, and the curriculum's becoming harder and harder and harder. So actually, why isn't the government addressing those factors? So I feel I've got kind of mixed feelings about this, really.
I find that interesting because children, it is that thing, isn't it, where schools, they have to kind of pick up the slack. And I remember being in a reception class once. I was on long-term supply and I just needed to go into reception for a day because reception was not somewhere where I really wanted to set foot because I was secondary trained.
Reception.
I was just like, I feel so out of my comfort zone.
My first teaching post was reception.
Oh, really? Well, my daughter's in the nursery class now, so I'm kind of getting it from the other end. But yeah, they brush the teeth. And I even spoke to the teaching assistant about it, and she said, this is what they do now, in case they don't do it at home. And I thought, what a responsibility for a 4-year-old. So it's the same thing where, you kind of, it's almost like giving the responsibility to the child. Like, we're giving you this in school, but you need to make this work in the other 2/3 of your life. That is a massive responsibility. How can a child be in control of that?
And often we focus on the child, so the interventions are all around the child. So the child becomes a site of intervention, But actually, the interventions I feel need to be around the society that we're subjecting children to, and why are we not intervening, within issues such as poverty? Why are we not intervening with the curriculum? Why are we not intervening with the assessment system? Why are we always placing it on the child and focusing on that level of intervention rather than the bigger factors that may be causing these problems? Like resilience, for example, we hear a lot about resilience interventions in school. Children take resilience interventions and they're told that they need to be more resilient. Well, actually, is it the child's responsibility to become more resilient? Because we know that other factors affect children's resilience. So, if they've got access to social networks, if they've got access to a supportive family and supportive teachers, if they've got access to a positive school environment, if they've got access to an education policy that actually creates positive well-being, that will enable them to be more resilient. So we can't just place it on the child and say actually the child needs to become more resilient, because resilience is relational. It depends on our relationships with other people and with our school context and with society as well.
Yeah, thank you. Do you know, I'm just going to tell everyone on the podcast that just before the interview you said, I can't talk a lot. I need to really go right.
I care about things I'm passionate about.
Well, and this is exactly why I'm here. So thank you so much. Right, okay then. So, which school-based interventions do you think are effective?
Well, I've done a couple of evaluations in the last couple of years around physical activity, and they've been really, really successful. So, one intervention that I was involved in with Cambridge, it was Cambridge United actually, Cambridge United Football Club, was actually the football club and the sports coaches actually going into school and delivering the mental health curriculum to students in year 8 and 9. So actually it wasn't the teachers delivering the curriculum, it was actually the football club, and that was really, really powerful. I think for a number of reasons. So firstly, it was the fact that it wasn't delivered by teachers, and they could have the children could have a more informal relationship with the sports coaches. That was really good. And secondly, these people were their role models. So actually getting footballers to come into classrooms and talk about their own mental health and their own experiences of depression, that was really powerful. So what we did was we measured the children's mental health literacy, in other words, what they know about mental health before the intervention and after the intervention, and it was really successful.
That's really good.
So actually involving organisations such as football clubs, and other organisations that are really sort of interested in mental health, I think it's really powerful. Another one was peer mentoring. So training children to become peer mentors, that was really powerful. Training children to become good peer listeners. So what we know is that children would rather talk to each other than talk to an adult. If they're experiencing poor mental health, they're worried that if they talk to a teacher, the teacher might have to tell somebody, and refer that on. So training children up in the skills of listening, so that they know how to be a good listener, but they also know when to refer a situation on. That seems to be really powerful. So peer listening schemes or peer mentoring schemes are really, really effective. Some schools are using obviously mindfulness, and that seems to be doing quite well. Seems to be quite effective in lots of schools. I think we need to do a more robust evaluation of mindfulness actually. Some schools say it's really good, some schools don't really say it's having an impact, so I think we need to know more about mindfulness.
I also think sometimes it depends on the way it's delivered or what you're actually doing for it. I mean, my first thought of mindfulness is I've seen online that there's a load of colouring sheets.
Mindful colouring.
Yeah, this is it. Just print out a few. Colouring sheets, and that's your mindfulness done. And I guess it depends how it's done.
So I think what is really effective, apart from the interventions, is the whole school approach to mental health. Can I talk about the whole school approach?
Of course you can.
So the whole school approach to mental health, if the whole school approach is implemented, it should reduce the number of children who need to be referred on to external services. So The whole school approach basically, and we use the model that's been developed by Public Health England in 2015. So it starts with the leadership and the management team of the school really championing mental health and thinking about it at a very strategic level. So, you know, is there a policy around mental health in the school? You know, is mental health something that's discussed in senior leadership team meetings or governors meetings for children, young people and for staff?
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about it at a very strategic level. And then we've got to think about the school environment that we're creating. So is the school environment positive? Does it value diversity? Does it enable children to experience a sense of inclusion and a sense of positive well-being? So we've got to think about the school climate. And then the school curriculum and teaching and learning. So actually, what are we teaching children about mental health? And this is now coming into schools in September. So in September, all schools will have to provide children with a mental health curriculum. So actually, what are we teaching children about mental health? So, and what does that look like in the early years and Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 and secondary? You know, how does that progress? So in the early years, we might be teaching children about feelings and emotions and, you know, how to regulate their feelings and emotions. But then at what point then do we start to introduce children to the language of mental health and specific mental health conditions? So we need to think about age appropriateness there. So giving children a mental health curriculum is really, really key, and that's part of the whole school approach. And that will reduce the number of children who need to come through with specific needs, because actually a good mental health curriculum should be giving children strategies to manage their own mental health. So teaching them how to manage stress and anxiety and depression, etc. And it should be educating children about self-harm, etc. and social media. And then there's obviously staff training and staff development, so, you know, making sure that all staff can identify the signs and symptoms of poor mental health and know how to identify it and spot it is key.
In other members of staff as well as pupils? In
staff as well as pupils, staff wellbeing should be part of the whole school approach as well. And then the school needs to have a system for identification of need. Now, I talk a lot about this, so how do schools identify children and young people with poor mental health? So often it's children who demonstrate visible signs. You know, so they might notice a child self-harming, they might notice changes in mood or changes in behaviour, they might notice changes in appearance. So often it's like a reactive approach. They notice something. But with mental health, it's often not a visible sign. You know, it can be hidden away. So a child could be depressed but be functioning as though they're absolutely fine. You know, a child could be self-harming and they'll go to all sorts of lengths to actually cover that up. You know, so when we think about identification, it can't just be based on a reactive approach. You know, we need to think about universal screening so that all children go through some kind of screening process. And that will pick up then, if we've got universal screening, that will pick up children who need support. Then we need to think about interventions, and we need to think about interventions for groups of children who've got similar needs or individual children who need specific interventions. And then we need to think about working with parents. So this is part of the whole school approach. So we know that actually there might be a link between child mental health and parental mental health. So, you know, what is the school then doing around supporting parental mental health? Is the school signposting parents to services, you know, within the community? Is the school actually doing sessions so that parents can manage their own mental health, you know, running workshops to support parents with managing their own mental health? But also, is the school supporting the parents to manage the mental health of their child at home, so that actually if the child is anxious or stressed or depressed, that the parents have got some strategies for managing that.
Instead of making it worse.
And then there's obviously then the last part of the whole school approach that is thinking about referral and having a clear policy on when to refer children on.
Okay. So this is to be...
Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, but that's brilliant for people. So this is in place for September. You know, that's a massive piece of work for schools. You know, if you've got any tips or places to go to kind of start them off if they haven't started already.
Okay, so the relationships and sex education guidance, which will be statutory, well, it's relationships and sex education and health education, which will be coming into schools in September, outlines the content that schools need to teach. But the problem with mental health is there's lots of information on the internet, but it's all kind of disparate, it's spread all over the place, and what we need to do is pull that together. Now, there is a good website called the Mentally Healthy Schools website. So if you just Google Mentally Healthy Schools, it's a brilliant website, and it's great because it pulls together all the different sources of information. It gives teachers background information about different types of mental health. It's got videos, it's got lesson plans, it's got how to have a conversation with a child if they make a disclosure. So that's a really good resource. But it is specifically for primary schools, not secondary schools.
Right, okay.
But there, again, even for secondary schools, it's still quite a useful resource. But yeah, I mean, looking on websites such as Young Minds, that's a good place to start. But the problem is there's so much information for teachers, and teachers are really, really busy, and they haven't got time to do all that searching.
No.
We need to pull it together.
Yeah, and also I think it can be a frightening thing to teach as well, just because as we've said before, sometimes we don't really have the right thoughts when we think of the words mental health, and also, you know, are we worried that we're going to get it wrong when it's such an important thing as well? And I think, you know, I feel like I've learned a lot more about mental health over the last few years, as a lot of people probably have. But actually, one of the reasons why I feel like I have is because the more I learn about it, the more I realise. So I had an emergency section with my first child, and do you know what? Nothing really went wrong. But the more I realise now, I'm like, I talked about that every single day for 18 months. And I realise now that actually, had I have not had a supportive husband who just listened to me talk about it every day for 18 months, then I might be in a different situation now.
Absolutely. And that's the key thing, isn't it, with mental health, is that, you know, talking about how you feel is really, really key. And we need to get boys to understand that they need to talk about their feelings. You know, there's still that stigma, there's still that sort of stereotype with some boys that they feel that they can't talk about their feelings and emotions, and, you know, we need to break down those stereotypes, because it's absolutely imperative that young children know, and children and young people know how to talk about their feelings, and know the importance of talking about their feelings.
And I think the one thing that I've learned, and obviously everybody's different, and I'm not saying this is right, but the one thing that I've learned is that talking about it once isn't enough. And you know, I've learned that if somebody wants to talk to me about something again and again and again and again and again, that I need to listen, because it could be that you need to talk about it an awful lot to kind of get over it.
Yeah, and I think we need to get better at listening.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to be an expert in the thing that someone's talking about, but you just need to be there for them and listen to them and actually empathise with them.
Yeah.
And that's key. And you know, we need to sort of support young people to become better listeners, so they can listen to each other, but also support teachers to become good listeners as well.
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? I think, you know, as parents, when I sort of think back to my own experience as well, it's easy to sometimes jump into the defence of maybe the other person if somebody's sort of got an issue, but that's really unhelpful. You just want that empathy. I understand how you're feeling, and that's okay.
And just validating those feelings, and
that it's okay to feel that way. Yeah,
I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the most valuable things I think I could do as a parent of, you know, I mean, Hattie's 3 and she hasn't really said that yet, but what I am aware of now, because I feel maybe I kind of suffered a bit from this, I just want to know that what I'm saying is also allowed to be said, you know, and not kind of jump into the defence all the time. Okay, so I've got loads of questions from the team, so they're really good. This time Lee's written you loads of lovely questions. So he says, what can we do in primary education that helps prevent discrimination and bullying when children go to high school?
I think that it's really important that we educate children about bullying and the effects of bullying very, very early on. So in primary school, it's not just enough, is it, just to deal with bullying when it happens and to have that reactive approach. We actually need to educate children about bullying and what bullying is and the harmful effects of bullying, and that needs to be part of PSHE. So when children, are you talking about when children actually go into high school?
Yeah, I think he means, what can we be doing in primary school so that when we get to secondary school, they're not.
Right, so I think that there's a couple of things there. So when children experience bullying, they need to know how to respond to that. So they need to know how to ask for help in that situation. But also it's about educating young people about the bystander effect as well, so that if they observe bullying, discrimination and violence, etc., that they know that their responsibilities, as somebody who's observed that, is to actually report that. So that's really, really key. But obviously then children need to understand about bullying and the harmful effects of bullying, and also the potential consequences of being a bully.
Yeah. No, I do agree with that. I don't think when I was at school we really learned anything about the effects of it, and I think that could have been useful for quite a few people, not me.
Now what I love about the new relationships and sex education guidance is there's a really, really big focus on respectful relationships. So what does respect look like in terms of friendships, how to be respectful within friendships, but also how to be respectful within intimate relationships. And there's a really big focus on things like themes such as coercion and manipulation and domestic violence as well. And I think it's great now that children are going to learn about those things so that they can identify them really, really early on and spot them when it's happening.
Yeah, because sometimes, I guess, I imagine children can go on to be adults, and maybe 6-7 years later when they start thinking about these things or learning about these things, they look back and go, hang on a minute, that could have been this or that could have been that. Because at the time, things are new, you're vulnerable, you just you don't realise, do you?
But I think also when children are going into secondary school, so when they're we know that the transition from primary school to secondary school is a particularly vulnerable time for young people. So they're transitioning to a new school, a bigger school, a new way of learning, a new curriculum, a new way of assessment, and also they're meeting new friends, etc. So
the freedom levels of some of them as well.
Sorry?
The freedom levels. Sometimes they were never allowed to be free, and now they've got to get the bus themselves. And
they've got to turn up at lessons at certain times, etc., in certain places, and so they're experiencing multiple transitions all at the same time. And that's when if transitions are experienced smoothly, that can result in good mental health. But actually, if some of those transitions are difficult and rocky, then that can result in poor mental health. So we need to be aware of those transitions that young people are going through at that time. Yeah,
and I guess if they're feeling vulnerable at that time as well, they might appear vulnerable, which then could make them more of a target as well. It's just a horrible cycle. I just wish people could be nice all the time. Okay, so Lee's got 4 more questions for you. So his next question. He says, what advice would you give to a teacher who is already a teacher and then they realise as an adult that they're LGBTQ+, specifically trans?
Okay, so this is an area that I'm really interested in and passionate about, and also research. So at Leeds Beckett we've created a centre for LGBTQ inclusion in education. I'm the director of the centre. So we support schools with issues such as this, and we generate research and support resources for practice as well. I think first of all, it's probably likely the teacher will already know they're LGBT. Way before they become an adult, way before they become a teacher. They'll often know at a very young age. The issue, I think, will be whether they feel safe to actually, within the school environment, to actually disclose their sexuality or gender identity. So when a teacher goes into a school, they will be sussing out, how inclusive that school is. They'll be anticipating the reactions of colleagues, they'll be anticipating the reactions of students and the reactions of parents. There's an interesting model of, I don't want to bombard you with theory, but there's an interesting model of minority stress which was developed by Mayer in 2003. And Mayer says that if you are an individual, well, first of all, he says that everybody experiences general stressors within their life. So it could be to do with poverty, housing, relationships, finances, whatever. We're all exposed to general stressors. But Mayer says that if you're an individual belonging to a minority group, such as LGBT, then you experience, or race or disability, you experience 2 more levels of stress on top of that. So one type of stressor are called distal stressors, and that is when minority groups, individuals belonging to minority groups, encounter prejudice or discrimination. And that's the effects of that on how that results in stress for them. So it's the direct encountering of prejudice. But then the other stressor that Mayer identifies are called proximal stressors, and this is when the individual from a minority group anticipates that they're going to experience those things. Right. They anticipate that they're going to experience those distal stressors, so they anticipate they're going to experience prejudice and violence and discrimination. So you imagine this LGBT teacher, this transgender teacher, they will be anticipating that if they come out, if they disclose their sexuality or gender identity, that they will be exposed to prejudice. Yeah. Right? So they will be anticipating a negative reaction from people. And it's about creating that positive school culture right from the beginning, so that when that teacher goes to work in that school, they know it's a safe place. I think that's really, really important. Sorry, just go back to the question, because I might have just got sidetracked there.
Okay, so Lee says, what advice would you give to a teacher who realises that they're LGBTQ+, but specifically trans?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things that could be going on here. So what we know from the research is that LGBTQ teachers will either pass off as being straight, sometimes within schools, or they'll cover it up. Basically, so they'll engage in strategies to either pass off as being straight, or they'll cover up their sexuality or gender identity because they're worried about the reactions of colleagues and students and parents. The literature refers to this as knitters, splitters, and quitters. That's something else. So a knitter is when they knit their personal identity with their professional identity, so they join them together, right? And they, so they're okay with who they are, and they're actually out within the workplace. A splitter is someone who splits their identities, their personal identities and professional identities, so they actually don't bring their personal identities into the classroom at all. And some teachers are quitters, so they're so stressed by the whole thing that they just leave the teaching profession altogether. So I think, first of all, what advice would I give to a teacher? Sorry, I'm waffling.
No, it's great.
What advice would I give to a teacher who is thinking of coming out? I think it would initially be to suss that situation, and to get a sense of, actually, would this be a safe place for me to come out? And what would potentially be the effects of this, because what I don't want to say is that everybody should be out, because it's a very personal decision, and if they choose to come out and then they're subjected to those distal stressors, prejudice and discrimination, that would be awful. So they've got to suss that situation and think, actually, is this a safe thing to do? But also, it's complex, because we know that teachers perform better if they can be authentic, if they can be themselves, right? So if they're not allowed to be themselves at work, if they're not allowed to, disclose their identities, their personal identities, their sexuality or gender identity, it will impact. And it will impact on their teaching, it will impact on their well-being. So I would say that what they need to do is talk to colleagues. They need to talk to a trusted colleague, and they need to talk to the leadership team. They need to talk to somebody on the leadership team, maybe the head teacher, because actually they are protected by the law. They're protected by the Equality Act. So actually, legally they cannot be discriminated against because of their sexuality or gender identity. And I think that if you've got a teacher who identifies as transgender and that teacher decides that they want to transition whilst they're in post, or if they're LGB and they want to come out, then it's a case of them going. They need to go and talk to the leadership team, and they need to say, actually, this is actually what's going to happen. I'm going to disclose my identity. I'm going to come out. And they need to lead that process. So they need to say, this is how I'd like you to manage it. Because it's not a case of the school. The school shouldn't actually be saying, right, we'll do this, this and this. Actually, that individual should be able to lead that process, really, so that they actually tell the leaders how they want it managed, really. And then they need to be confident in the fact that they will be protected by the equality legislation, and they need to be confident that they shouldn't experience any discrimination because they're protected by that equality legislation. But I think they need to feel confident in managing that process. So they need to have a network of people in the school they can talk to. They need to find out the people who they trust the most and talk to them. But at some point they may need to talk to the leadership team, particularly if they're transitioning whilst they're in post, because the school will then need to think about how they manage that process and how they communicate that with staff and to pupils and to parents. But that teacher needs to be in charge of that process so that they lead it, really, and they're almost telling the school leaders, I want you to manage it like this, basically.
Yeah, thank you. That was an amazing answer. Okay, so he's got another question for you. I feel like he's interviewing you for a job. So, some parents don't think that children should learn about LGBTQ relationships at a young age. So what do we do to fight the stigma?
I think there's a couple of things here. So I think, first of all, parents often don't understand what children exactly will be learning. So they automatically associate LGBT with sex. So they think we're teaching children about sex and that's not appropriate. This is not about teaching children about sex at all, is it? It's about teaching children about identities, and it's about teaching children to respect difference and differences, which is fundamentally a part of the Equality Act. So part of the Equality Act is that we need to foster good relations between different groups of people, whether it's race or whether it's disability or whether it's to do with sexuality or gender, that we should be fostering good relations. Because the Equality Act is not just about preventing discrimination. People always think it's to do with preventing discrimination, which it is, but also there is section 149 of the Equality Act, which is about fostering good relations. So my view is that I have a very simple view on this, which is that if it's age appropriate for children to learn about heterosexual identities at the age of 2, and heterosexual relationships and, heterosexual marriage at the age of 2, why is it not appropriate for them to learn about same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage at the age of 2? Because actually, lots of children will be actually from same-sex parents. So you might get a 3-year-old who's actually got 2 mums or 2 dads. So actually, why is it not age appropriate that we talk about their family like we talk about any family? So I question this thing of age appropriateness, because I always wonder what it means. Because is it because they think that actually we're talking to children about sex? Actually, we're not talking to children about sex. We're just talking about difference, and we're talking about identities and relationships and respecting people who are different. And actually, the fact that within the world they will meet people, all sorts of different people, and actually we want them to respect that. So I think my view is that we should be teaching children about different identities right from the beginning. I think that we should be teaching children about LGBTQ plus identities right from the beginning, and we can do this through stories. There's some fantastic stories now where children are introduced to kind of non-traditional family structures. So, they might be introduced to stories where a character's got 2 mums or 2 dads, or even a single parent, or, so that children grow up understanding that actually this is the world. and that in the world we have different types of people from different types of backgrounds, but we have to respect everybody.
And I think it's I mean, how many children now are in a class where there isn't at least one child who doesn't have a traditional family background?
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. So, you know, and actually, if you're doing a topic on, you know, weddings or marriage or whatever, and a child brings in a photograph to show, you know, that their family is 2 dads or 2 mums, why should we not validate that? We should be validating that. We should be talking about it.
Yeah.
It's really important.
And that child needs to tell their story, absolutely.
Yeah, because otherwise, if children don't feel that their family backgrounds are respected, they won't feel included in that school. If all we ever talk about is heterosexual relationships and heterosexual marriage, then and actually they're from a family where there's 2 mums or 2 dads, and we don't talk about that, then they won't feel included. They won't have a sense of belonging. They could possibly develop poor mental health as a result. So we have to just see this as being completely normal.
And as a person, it doesn't make them different either. You know, it doesn't kind of have any bearing or effect on them. You know,
children don't have any issues with this, by the way.
No,
children are absolutely fine with this. So children don't have the prejudice that adults have.
Yeah. Okay. So more questions from Lee. I'm very sorry about this, but he does write good questions. So
he does.
So, is the curriculum of what we teach inclusive enough?
Wow, that's a good question, isn't it? Okay, it's a big question. Right, so I think there's a couple of things here that I would highlight. So, for example, we have a code of practice for special educational needs that talks about how we should support individual children basically with special educational needs. So it talks about the process of supporting children with special educational needs. So it talks about diagnosis, intervention, working with parents, working with agencies, etc. When do we actually, in the curriculum, educate children about disability? So we don't, basically. No. So that we have a code of practice that focuses on if we have children with SEN, this is what we do. But we don't. When do we actually educate children about disability and, you know, the history of people who have disabled identities and how that's changed over time?
Yeah.
That needs to be embedded within the curriculum so that children start to understand that actually the disabled identity is not a tragic identity.
And maybe part of the problem is that we're kind of relying on parents to educate, and maybe that's why we're getting such a varied.
Yeah. So we need to be educating children about disability. All children need to be educated about you know, different types of disabilities, and they also need to be educated about the fact that actually people with disabled identities can achieve brilliant things, such as the Paralympics.
Yeah.
You know, they need to not see disability as a tragic thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. So there's not enough coverage of, you know, of disabled identities within the curriculum. You know, we need to be introducing children to disabled role models. We need to be challenging this view that disability is a tragic thing. We need to be educating children about race and race equality, you know, through the curriculum. Not just dealing with, I mean, obviously we need to deal with racism, but we need to be educating children about race, and we need to be building that through the curriculum and embedding issues of race equality through the curriculum. And in the same way with LGBT, we need to not just be tackling homophobic bullying and biphobic bullying and transphobic bullying. We need to be educating children about non-heterosexual identities and also their histories as well. So, you know, with disability, with race, with sexuality, with gender, we need to be teaching children about their histories and how they've moved, you know, how perceptions of that particular group have changed over time. And it needs to come through the curriculum, not just through doing, let's do an assembly on LGBT. It's got to be embedded and threaded through the curriculum, I think. So I think the curriculum could be more inclusive. Sorry, go back to the question. Is the curriculum inclusive?
Is it inclusive enough?
So it's not inclusive enough for other reasons as well. Issues of race, disability, sexuality and gender are not embedded sufficiently through the curriculum. and issues of mental health need to be further embedded through the curriculum. So we need to be teaching children about mental health, and not just through PSHE, but through the curriculum. So actually, what are we doing in English about mental health? What are we teaching in art? So how are we using art as a vehicle for exploring mental health?
Yeah.
You know, what are we teaching children in, I don't know, music, about how can we link music into mental health, for example? The curriculum is increasingly academic, and it's increasingly been restricted, and therefore it hasn't been inclusive to children who have, shall we say, talents and strengths and interests in other areas of the curriculum.
Yes.
So children who are sort of more vocationally orientated, actually they've been marginalised for many, many years, because the curriculum has focused on the core subjects. It's focused on English and maths within primary schools, and it's focused insufficiently on the broader curriculum, so history, geography, music, art, you know, DT. All these subjects have been marginalised. And then in secondary schools, it's become an increasingly academic curriculum. Now, I'm pleased that Ofsted have recognised this, and in the latest Ofsted framework are now saying that actually schools need to be providing a broader curriculum. But I still think we've got a long way to go. Really, because we've seen this increasing academic focus on the academic curriculum, and we've seen the curriculum has become more and more restricted over many, many years. So it hasn't been, particularly in primary schools, it hasn't been inclusive.
No, thank you. Right, he's got one last question for you. It's a long one. Right, so obviously we've already talked about this, but RSC becomes compulsory in September. And he says the government website says that it has concerns about school leaders being reluctant to report issues regarding parents or etc. because it may be seen as weak leadership. So how do we support SLT in areas where like differing faiths, backgrounds, ideologies are at a high level, so that they don't feel like their ability to lead is being questioned?
Well, I think first of all, it's getting the message across that it's not weak leadership. I mean, what we have seen in Birmingham with the parental protests, and also in other places last year, is that we saw the tension between religion and sexuality coming together. Now, the issue there is that we had a school in Birmingham, Parkfield Community School, that were doing a fantastic job at promoting an inclusive curriculum. So they were doing lots around LGBT. They were using the No Outsiders curriculum, and then parents were basically objecting and saying that they disagreed with this curriculum being implemented. Now, the issue, I think, was the fact that, well, there was a few issues, but one of the key issues is that the school didn't get sufficient backing from Ofsted and from the DFE. Now, since then, Ofsted have come out and they've actually, you know, been really vocal about this and actually said that, you know, this needs to happen, that schools need to be actually teaching this, and the DFE have produced guidance. But at the time when this was happening in Birmingham, the guidance didn't exist. The DFE guidance wasn't there. So now the government guidance actually isn't brilliant, because what the government guidance says is that schools need to consult with parents.
Right.
Which is fine, but actually what if the parents don't want to consult? What if they just want a total like veto on the curriculum, which is actually what some parents want? So I think school leaders actually need more support from local authorities and from Ofsted and from the DFE, because actually ultimately they have got to implement this curriculum. All schools have got to teach children about inclusive relationships. All schools have got to actually teach children about LGBT identities. And parents won't have the ability to opt children out of that, because it's relationships education. They can only opt children out of sex education. So I think the key message there is that school leaders need to understand that this has nothing to do with weak leadership. This is actually around the tensions between religion and sexuality. Now, what school leaders need is they need real guidance on how to have a conversation with parents and how to develop consultation. So there's a couple of things here. So parents may object on religious grounds, and they may say, actually, our religion doesn't believe in this, so therefore we don't want you teaching this to our children. Okay, so it's really important that schools then provide a supportive response to that, because ultimately we have to, the Equality Act requires schools to, and children to be respectful of difference and to be respectful of different people's values and beliefs. So actually what we need to say then, the way we have that conversation with parents is to say, well, we understand that actually within your religion that's not acceptable, and that those are your values and those are your beliefs and those are your religious beliefs, so, and that's fine, but actually within the broader scheme of things, within the Equality Act, we have to teach the Equality Act, and the Equality Act says that we have to foster good relations between different groups. So we can't foster good relationships if we're not actually talking and highlighting to children the fact that there are people with different views and beliefs. So we have to actually foster those good relations. But secondly, fundamental British values that schools have to teach, one of the fundamental British values is the rule of law. And within this country, the rule of law is that same-sex relationships are lawful, same-sex marriage is lawful. So actually, we also need to teach children about the rule of law. So actually, this is about, we're not undermining the religion, and we're respecting where you're coming from in terms of your religion, but within the broader scheme of things, within society, this is actually legal, and therefore we need to teach children about what is legal and what is not legal. And ultimately, this is about, yes, this is actually not sort of lawful or allowed within your religion, but actually your children will meet LGBT people. They will meet people within school who identify as LGBT. They will meet people in college, in further education, in higher education. They will meet people in employment, and ultimately this is about showing respect towards everybody. So actually, what we want to do is foster good inclusive values that are rooted in positive relationships. So actually this is not about saying to your child, is it? It's not about saying we want your child to be LGBT or to believe in, to actually adopt that way of life. This is actually about fostering good inclusive attitudes and actually fostering good relationships. And ultimately we understand that this is not allowed within your religion, but actually this is broader than that. This is about actually supporting your child to be part of society in which they will meet other LGBT people. Yeah,
I also think, I'm not an expert, but as part of the multiple religions, surely it's not that they can't learn about it, it's just that it can't be their identity.
Yeah, so I think actually, just like we have to teach children about all religions.
Yeah.
Actually.
We were having this conversation in the car on the way over.
Yeah.
You would teach Hinduism, but that doesn't mean to say that you expect that child is going to go away and then be Hindu.
So actually, it's really, really very, very important that actually parents understand that we are not trying to impose a particular identity or viewpoint on your child. This is actually about preparing children for life within a socially inclusive, modern, contemporary society in which they will interact with people who are different, and therefore it's really important that we treat everybody with respect within this society. So I think, I don't think it's weak leadership at all. I think, parents, some of these issues with parents are very challenging for schools to deal with, and ultimately, if you are a school within specific cultural communities, then you might be worried about the parental backlash. That's not about weak leadership, because actually schools legally have to teach this. That's about, in those situations when that happens, actually somebody coming into the school and from the DFE and Ofsted and actually addressing those issues and supporting them.
Yeah, thank you. That was such an amazing answer. I feel like that's going to really help a lot of leaders, so thank you. Okay, right. Before I get to my quick fire questions at the end, so Lindsay's got a question now. Lee's finished his. And she says, so Lindsay works with us as well. She says, my sister-in-law currently transitioned socially and is waiting for surgery. My children gained an uncle overnight and never even questioned it when we told them. That made her wonder.
Children are wonderful, aren't they? They're brilliant.
Yeah, because they're just accepting, aren't they? So this made me wonder why there is a stigma. Surely the younger they are told and the more inclusive, we become. So I feel like this is not really a question, but I thought it was good to kind of mention, and if you've got any sort of points you kind of want to make on it.
Why is it still stigma? So it hasn't been an issue for the children,
no.
But has it been an issue for other people?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I can only assume so.
Yeah. So I think there is still there's still a fear of transgender people. There's a fear that somehow they're contaminating society, that they're that there is still this fear within some parts of the population. And I don't think it's necessarily an age thing either, because I think people either are prejudiced or they're not prejudiced, and I don't think that is necessarily to do with age. I know I've got friends who were in the 70s who were very, very open about different identities, and equally you can meet younger people. You can meet younger people who are prejudiced. So I think there is still a fear that actually somehow transgender people are dangerous, and there is definitely still a stigma. And there's also a view as well, I think, that they're a drain on society. That they're taking away resources, they're taking away, they have to take time out of work, for example, to have the surgery. They have to draw resources from the health service. So I think there's this view among some sections of society that actually they're a negative influence, and it's just because they're seen as being different, and people have got this fear somehow, and we need to smash that, because ultimately I always think difference and diversity makes the world a better place, and ultimately people should be allowed to be who they are and live their lives in the way they want to live their lives, but that we can't deny the fact that there is prejudice, and all this illustrates is that we have more to do now. The fact that we are now doing more education with children in school around LGBT, the fact that we're talking about transgender, we hope that actually what we'll see in the future is we'll see less and less prejudice coming through, and that when people are exposed to prejudice, they'll actually challenge it. That's what we want. And I think there's been lots of great work that's been going on over the last, say, between 5 and 10 years on LGBT identities in schools, and we're seeing a shift in attitudes, but there's more to do on transgender. There's a lot more education to do on transgender, because that's the area that schools are really struggling with. So they're struggling with it on lots of levels. So they're struggling with it in terms of what to do when a child identifies as transgender, or when a teacher identifies as transgender. So that's, they need more support, and they'll say, well, we want to do the right thing, but we don't quite know if we are doing the right thing. And schools need more guidance on that, on how to support young people who identify as transgender. But also schools need much more guidance on what to educate children around transgender. So what should be in a transgender curriculum? What should we actually be teaching children about transgender, and how do we teach it actually in a way that's accessible? So I think we haven't quite got there with that. I think there's much more work to be done in terms of educating children about transgender. And schools, actually, when I talk to schools, they really want to do this and they really believe in it passionately, but they want to do it right. They don't want to get it wrong.
And I think it's going back to that thing that we were talking about before. When we were talking about children with special educational needs, you have to try it sometimes, and sometimes you're not going to get it right straight away. But obviously it's such a sensitive subject that I think that is frightening for schools. But we kind of have to, like you say, it's not there yet, but we have to try it so that we can improve on it. and reflect.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, if you're going to implement any curriculum, so an LGBTQ curriculum, there has to be that process of consultation with the parents, so the parents understand this is what we're teaching. We're not teaching children about sex. Parents need to see the lesson plans. They need to see the resources that teachers are going to use. You know, and the vast majority of parents won't have any issue when they see them, because a lot of the resources are about challenging gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
But I think also it's about working in partnership with students. So actually, if you have transgender students, it's about actually saying to them, actually, you know, we don't know what to do. We need your help in this. Actually, can you guide us? What would you like us to do?
Yeah.
You know, what can we do that would make you feel more included, and get the children and young people to support the school in that journey. Although the onus shouldn't just be on the young people, should it, to carve that path. You know, there are things that schools should be thinking about anyway, like gender neutral uniforms and gender neutral toilets. But I think, you know, always doing things in partnership with children, so that you're doing it in the way they want it to happen. You know, schools need to be thinking about using children's, well, not just thinking about it, but using children's preferred names, and that, you know, because we don't want children being repeatedly misgendered. You know, so if their name is on a register and the school isn't allowed to change their name because legally they haven't changed their name, there are options for schools to actually put on the record prefers to be known as, so that when they go into a classroom, teachers know what name to use.
But
that's important, I think.
I didn't know that was a thing, to be honest, because I mean, we use nicknames and things all the time.
Yeah, they're not legally allowed to change the name
on the register,
on the school record system, so that when registers are printed out for teachers in class, they get.
So I guess if it's a supply teacher as well,
they get the birth name, but they can put prefers to be known as.
Yeah.
You know, so, but then it's about training staff as well, because some staff, you know, I've spoke to transgender young people and they've said, oh, the teacher refused to use my preferred name. You know, the teacher absolutely refused to use my preferred name and didn't use my preferred pronouns. So it's, again, there's an issue to do there with teacher education, teacher training around this area. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I've got 4.
I don't know whether I've answered the question.
Oh no, it's been a really good conversation. It's funny because my husband's cousin's wife is a teacher, and we were talking about this interview. She's in secondary, and we were talking about you know, training she's had about preferred pronouns and things. So it's interesting to sort of see the secondary side as well, because kind of get that from
yeah, we can all do really simple things, like, you know, on our emails we can just put pronouns on, you know, my pronouns are, and we can all do that. Everybody can do that. And how simple is that? It doesn't cost anything, but actually that demonstrates a commitment to inclusion. You know,
that was
really
what they'd actually told me that they've implemented at their school, and put it on the bottom of their emails. Okay, so if you could wave a magic wand, then how would you solve the life-work balance problem for teachers?
Well, we know that teacher stress is an issue, isn't it? It's an issue not just in this country but also worldwide. It's a global issue, and we know that actually, you know, the work-life balance problem causes teachers to go off sick. But then we also know that lots of teachers feel so guilty about going off sick. They worry about letting down their classes and letting down their colleagues and schools, that they actually continue working when they're really stressed. This is called presenteeism rather than absenteeism. So presenteeism is when they continue working when really they should be off. And
not very effective.
And it impacts on them and also the children. How would I solve it? Well, I think it's about schools developing manageable policies around planning and around marking and feedback, particularly. And, you know, the government have been talking about this now for 2 or 3 years, and they've been producing really, really helpful guidance, but actually doesn't seem to be finding its way into all schools. So there was, you know, we still hear stories of teachers that have been made to do ridiculous amounts of planning and ridiculous amounts of marking and feedback, etc. We need to go much more to giving children live feedback within lessons, you know, giving children quick verbal feedback and sometimes actually just focusing on marking a sample of books, identifying the key issues, and then in the following lesson addressing those key issues in your teaching, rather than thinking that you need to mark all 30 books. We need to get rid of this obsession of thinking that we have to mark every single piece of work. I think that's really important. And we need to stop micromanaging teachers by saying that marking has to be done or feedback has to be done in a particular format, or that planning has to be done in a particular format. So actually, if teachers just want to make a few notes and use bullet points, that should be absolutely fine. If teachers want to handwrite their planning rather than word process their planning, that should be absolutely fine. We need to give teachers back their autonomy and sense of professionalism, so that they do, because the majority of teachers are really, really hard working. They don't want to do a bad job, you know. So why are we constantly micromanaging them and saying that they have to produce 10-page lesson plans?
I know. Why do you have to write it out as a script?
Or write an essay at the bottom of children's work that they're not going to read. We just need to give teachers back some autonomy. We need to stop obsessing on teachers handing their planning in for scrutiny all the time by senior leaders. We need to just allow teachers to plan and assess and do feedback in the way they feel is appropriate for their classes and for their children. And I think just by doing that, it will be really, really massive in reducing teacher workload.
I guess for me it's the filtering down. Sometimes I feel like Ofsted send a tweet out and everyone's expected to know, oh, you don't have to do this anymore, but it doesn't filter down because it's not official.
And Ofsted really are not interested in your lesson plans. They're not interested in the amount you write in children's books. They're not interested in any of that. They just want to know if children are making progress, basically. And we just have to stop policing teachers in that way, and we have to give teachers some autonomy about their own working lives and the way they want to work.
Thank you. Okay, so where do you think education needs to go in the next 10 years?
Gosh, I think we need to get back to the broad curriculum, particularly in primary schools. I think we need to give children a rich curriculum, because actually, if we're not giving children a rich curriculum, if you imagine the jobs that are going to be out there in 15 years' time, 20 years' time, we can't even predict the jobs that now children will be doing in 15 years' time. But we do know that they're going to need a range of skills, aren't they? And they're going to need to be adaptable, they're going to need to be creative, they're going to need to work as part of teams, they're going to need to be able to problem solve. So the curriculum needs to be giving children those skills. It needs to be giving children the ability to problem solve, work as part of teams, collaborate and so on, and to be creative and adaptable. Now at the minute, I feel that because the curriculum focuses on exams, actually there's too much focus on children learning through PowerPoint. So children go from one lesson to another to another to another, and they're just given a PowerPoint presentation. That isn't going to develop the skills that children need to survive in the 21st century, in the world of work. So we need to get back to the broad curriculum. We need to get back to being creative in that curriculum, to getting children working in teams, to getting children problem solving, and collaborating and all of that. And then we need to think about technology, and we need to think that are we really making the best use of technology within teaching, because technology is, just growing, and it will grow in the future. And if you think about the way technology has grown, we've over the last few years, so we've gone from like the internet, Web 1, where we just kind of went on websites, Web 2 to looking at social media and interactivity and communication, and now Web 3, where basically we can control our heating system through our mobile phone, we control our burglar alarm system through our mobile phone, and we can do everything. The internet is everywhere, isn't it now? So we've gone through these various iterations of the web, and actually I still feel that schools are still on Web 1, really, and we haven't really embraced the potential of technology within learning and teaching.
What's the most interesting thing about that? So as we're filming right now, quite a few countries around the world have closed the schools because of the coronavirus, and we're kind of waiting, aren't we, to find out if it will happen. So I think we're roughly at the point where Italy were 12 days ago, and they've got, I mean, I don't know how many deaths it is, but it's over 300. And what's interesting is I've kind of done a bit of research online, and a lot of these countries are already geared up for home learning using the technology. But in the UK, not that many teachers already have this in place. You know, so I mean, we've been trying to encourage teachers to get that in place, but to teach the children in a few days, you know, for all we know, schools could shut in 2 weeks if it was the same thing.
And we won't actually be geared up for that.
No, this is it. That's what I mean.
So yeah, it's really
in the UK we are not geared
really
up for this.
important. You know, so actually the technology of the future will possibly be, you know, children doing much more of that. Children accessing technology from home. You know, and I just think we need to focus more on that, because that's the way of the future, really.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I just find it interesting that you've said it now, because actually I would have said, oh yeah, we're not behind with technology, but after this is now happening and I'm watching around the world and I'm thinking, maybe we are behind with technology.
Well, we definitely are in schools, I think.
Yeah,
definitely.
in schools.
You know, and especially when we have these blanket bans on mobile phones and things within schools.
Yeah, and I find that interesting. It's difficult because you kind of have to manage it, but in our workplace, everyone always has the mobile phone out because we have Microsoft Teams, and it's easier to reply on your phone, and then you're on your computer. And you're on your phone,
so actually, what we want to do is we want to kind of replicate the work environment within school, don't we?
Yeah,
and otherwise, how are we going to set children up for life? You know, within the workplace, within the modern workplace. So it's an interesting one, but I think we need to get back to the broad curriculum. We need to embrace technology more within schools. We need to be making sure the curriculum's giving children the skills they need for the future, not just an academic curriculum. And, you know, I think that we need an assessment system that recognises that broader range of skills and recognises a broader range of strengths and talents, not just recognising maths and English.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so who was your favourite teacher at school and why?
My favourite teacher was, I have to say, my history teacher. Am I allowed to name them?
Of course you are.
So she was called Miss McPherson. She was a very young teacher at the time, so she'd probably not been qualified very long. She might be in her 50s now. She might be heading towards retirement. But she was fantastic. She was a history teacher. She was enthusiastic. She was passionate. But she had a great relationship with the students, and that's the one thing you remember. You forget what they teach you, although she did instill a passion of history in me, but you forget what they teach you, but you don't forget how they treat you.
Yes.
And that's the key. And, you know, I've never forgotten that. I've never forgot. She empowered me, she motivated me, she enthused me. But I used to look forward to going to her classes because of the relationship that she'd formed with the students.
Yeah, thank you. I hope she's listening.
I hope she is.
Out, yeah.
You inspired me to become a professor.
So well done on that one. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
A teacher, always a teacher.
And that's what you became. And not only did you become a teacher, but you became a teacher of teachers and shaping the education of the country.
Yeah. I used to have a bedroom. I used to pretend that my bedroom was my classroom. I used to have fictitious children. Very, very sad, really.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, I'm excited to get this episode out because I actually think, I mean, some of the things that you were talking about in terms of, you know, when you were talking about school in Birmingham, I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of leaders, because sometimes I feel like, you know, even with the coronavirus right now, it's like, it's almost like we're sitting ducks waiting just to find out what the news from above is, and there's no gap in between of the guidance and the kind of things that we are allowed and not allowed to do. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
so
much.